Imagine a glass of water, crystal clear and cool, sitting on a table. It is there for anyone who is thirsty. One person takes a sip, then another takes a gulp, and soon a crowd gathers. They don't just drink. They spill it, they throw it at each other, and they demand that the glass stay full even as they knock it over. Eventually, the glass is bone dry, cracked, and forgotten in the dust. This is the silent tragedy of the heart that does not know how to say no. We are taught from childhood that being good is the highest virtue, that self-sacrifice is the mark of a hero. But there is a shadow to this light. There is a point where generosity stops being a blessing and starts becoming a slow, agonizing self-destruction. Today, we journey into the life of a man who learned that the hardest part of being a good person isn't the giving, it's knowing when to stop. If you have ever felt like your kindness is a weight pulling you under, if you have ever felt used by the very people you helped, this story is the mirror you have been waiting to look into. The wind swept through the high-altitude valley of Oak Haven, a place where the air was thin and the stone houses were built to withstand centuries of snow. In this valley lived a man named Silas. Silas was a craftsman of rare talent, a man whose hands could coax warmth out of cold timber and strength out of rusted iron. But Silas was known for something far more valuable than his trade. He was known for his yes. In Oak Haven, if a roof leaked in the middle of a storm, Silas was there. If a traveler lacked a coat, Silas gave his own. If a neighbor was lonely, Silas would sit by their hearth for hours. Ignoring his own cold dinner, Silas lived by a simple philosophy: to be useful is to be worthy. He believed that, by filling every gap in other people's lives, he was building a fortress of love around his own. He thought that if he was indispensable, he would never be alone. But as the years passed, Silas began to notice a strange sensation in his chest. It felt like a hollow drumming, a physical echo of emptiness. Scientifically, Silas was experiencing what psychologists call compassion fatigue, when we constantly give without emotional or physical replenishment. Our brain's prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, begins to lose its grip. Body enters a state of chronic stress, releasing a steady drip of cortisol that erodes the immune system and clouds the mind. Silas wasn't just tired, he was biologically breaking down. One Tuesday morning, as the frost still clung to the window panes, a heavy knock echoed through Silas's small workshop. It was Cale, a man who owned the largest orchard in the valley. Cale's face was red with false urgency. He told Silas that his main irrigation gate had jammed, and that if it wasn't fixed by sundown, his trees would suffer. Silas looked at his own workbench. He had 3 orders of furniture to finish his only source of income for the month, and his own joints ached from the damp cold. He wanted to say he couldn't. He wanted to say he needed to work for himself today. But his brain was wired with a people-pleasing reflex. In psychology, this is often a trauma response or a deeply ingrained social habit, where the fear of disappointing others triggers a fawn response. The brain perceives a neighbor's disapproval as a threat to survival. Silas smiled a weary, thin smile and picked up his heavy bag of tools. He spent 14 hours in the freezing mud of the orchard. He worked until his fingernails bled and his breath came in ragged gasps. When the gate finally creaked open and the water began to flow, Cale didn't offer a hot meal or a coin for the labor. He simply looked at the gate and said that Silas should have come earlier in the morning, as the delay had made him anxious. Then Cale walked away into his warm house, leaving Silas alone in the dark. Wet field, walking home, Silas felt a bitterness he had never known. It was a poison in his veins. He realized that Cale didn't see a friend. He saw a tool. And you do not thank a hammer for hitting a nail. You simply expect it to work. This is the adaptation level phenomenon in psychology. When you are consistently overgenerous, people's baseline expectations of you shift. Your extraordinary sacrifice becomes their ordinary expectation. Sin. The more you do, the less it is worth in their eyes. Bit. Because they no longer see your effort as a choice, they see it as your duty. A week later, a childhood friend named Alara came to Silas. She was in financial trouble again. Silas had already given her a significant portion of his savings the year before. Money she had promised to return, but had instead spent on luxury fabrics from the traveling merchants. Silas knew he shouldn't give more. He knew he needed that money for his own winter supplies, but Ilara knew his weakness. She spoke of her bad luck and her despair, weaving a narrative that made Silas feel like his refusal would be an act of cruelty. He handed her the coins. He watched her walk away, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a good man. He felt like a victim. He felt like a ghost inhabiting a body that no longer belonged to him. That evening, the elders of the valley called a meeting at the great hall. The village bridge had been damaged by a rockfall. As the leaders discussed the repair, the room went silent, and every pair of eyes landed on Silas. They didn't even ask for volunteers. The elders simply said, "Silas will manage the timber work. He's the best we have, and he never minds the extra hours." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Silas sat in the back, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was surrounded by people who loved him, yet he felt more invisible than a shadow. He realized that their love was conditional on his exhaustion. They didn't love Silas. They loved what Silas did for them. Broken and unable to sleep, Silas wandered out of the village toward the old forest. There, near a crumbling stone shrine, he found a traveler sitting by a small, perfectly managed fire. The traveler was an old woman with eyes like polished obsidian. She looked at Silas and didn't offer a greeting. Instead, she said, "A lamp that tries to light the whole world with one wick will only burn itself to ash in a single night." Silas sat across from her, his head in his hands. He poured out his heart. He told her about the roof, the money, the bridge, and the crushing weight of being good. The old woman listened. Then she poked the fire. She explained to him the science of reciprocity. In nature, every healthy system relies on a balance of give and take. If a tree gives all its oxygen but receives no CO2, it dies. If a heart pumps blood out but never receives it back, it stops. "You think you are being kind," she said, her voice like dry leaves, "but you are actually being dishonest. You say yes when your soul is screaming no. That is a lie. You are teaching these people that your time has no value. You are teaching them to be takers, which robs them of the chance to be grateful. Kindness without a boundary is just a slow suicide. To be truly good, you must be a gatekeeper, not a doormat." She told him about the cognitive dissonance his neighbors were experiencing. Because Silas never asked for anything, they had convinced themselves that Silas didn't need anything. They had dehumanized him into a permanent resource to change his life. He didn't need to become a villain. He needed to become a person with edges. The next morning, the sun rose with a sharp, unforgiving clarity. There was a knock at Silas's door. It was Cale again. He wanted Silas to come and paint his barn. Silas felt the old familiar panic rise in his throat, the fear of the conflict, the fear of the mean label. But he remembered the old woman's words. He took a breath, feeling the air fill his lungs fully for the first time in years. "No," Silas said. The word was small, but it felt like a mountain. Cale blinked, his mouth hanging open. "What do you mean?" "No. It's just a barn, Silas. I'll have the brushes ready. I have my own work to finish," Silas said, his voice steady. "And more importantly, I need to rest. I cannot paint your barn. Kale's face transformed, the mask of neighborly friendship dropped, revealing a sneer of entitlement. You've become selfish, Silas. After everything this village has said about you, you're going to let me down over a bit of rest. I thought you were a good man. In that moment, Silas saw the truth. Kale's anger was the proof that the kindness was a trap. Kale wasn't upset because Silas was being bad. He was upset because his free labor was being cut off. When a person reacts to your boundaries with anger, it is the ultimate sign that the boundary was absolutely necessary. Silas realized that those who benefit from your lack of boundaries are the ones who will fight hardest when you finally set them. He closed the door, and as the wood clicked into the frame, a massive weight evaporated from his shoulders. Days later, Elara came back, asking for just a few more coins to cover a debt. Silas looked at her, not with anger, but with a calm, detached sadness. I cannot give you any more money, Elara. I gave you what I could, and you didn't respect the gift. My resources are now reserved for my own life, and for those who understand what a sacrifice is. Elara shouted, she cried, she called him cold-hearted. Silas simply watched her, realizing that her drama was no longer his responsibility. When the village bridge work began, Silas did not show up alone with his tools. He walked to the site and stood before the elders. I will help design the bridge, he said, and I will work for 4 hours each morning. But I will not do it alone, and I will not work until I collapse. We will all take shifts, or the bridge will remain broken. The elders were stunned. Blur was grumbling. There were whispers that Silas had changed for the worse, but a strange thing happened. Because Silas stood his ground, 3 young men who usually spent their days idling stepped forward to help. They hadn't helped before because they knew Silas would do it for them. By saying no, Silas had forced the community to grow. He had stopped enabling their laziness. Months passed, and the new Silas became a fixture of Oakhaven. Hugh was still the best craftsman, and he was still a man of deep integrity. But he was no longer a man who could be summoned like a servant. He began to experience what is known as post-traumatic growth. His health returned. The hollow drumming in his chest was replaced by a solid, quiet peace. He spent his evenings reading by his own fire, his tools cleaned and put away, his mind free of the invisible debts of others. The most profound change, however, was in the quality of his relationships. The people who only wanted Silas for what they could take gradually drifted away. They found other, easier targets. But a few people stayed. A young farmer named Jace came to Silas one day, not with a demand, but with a basket of apples and a question. Silas, I want to learn how to build a sturdy plow. If I help you in your shop for a month, would you teach me? Silas looked at the young man. He saw respect. He saw the desire for a fair exchange. Yes, Silas said, I would like that. For the first time, Silas felt the warmth of a true connection, a bridge built on mutual value rather than one-sided exploitation. As we reach the end of this story, look at your own hands. Look at your own schedule. Are you the Silas of the first half of the story, or the second? There is a biological and psychological cost to being too good. Your brain is designed to seek social harmony, but not at the cost of your own extinction. When you say yes to someone else, make sure you aren't saying no to yourself. Kindness is a beautiful, sacred fire. It can keep a village warm, and it can light the way through the darkest night. But a fire without a hearth, a fire that is allowed to spread without control, will eventually burn down the very house it was meant to protect. Being strategic with your goodness isn't about being cold. It's about being sustainable. It's about ensuring that you have enough light left to see your own way home. The world will always have takers. They are a natural part of the human landscape. They will find your soft spots. They will use your guilt as a handle. And they will drain you until you are a husk of the person you once were. But they can only do this if you give them the key. Today, take that key back. Understand that your no is just as holy as your yes. Understand that you are allowed to be the protagonist of your own life. Not just a supporting character in everyone else's. As the sun sets over the valley of Oakhaven, Silas sits on his porch. He is still a good man. Perhaps he is a better man now than he ever was before. Because now, when he helps, he does it with a full heart, not an empty one. He is kind, yes, but he is also wise. And in the silence of the evening, he finally hears something he hasn't heard in years. He hears his own voice, and it is at peace.